All right, let's dive in. Today, we are breaking down the massive ideas, the blueprints, really, that political thinkers use to make sense of our world. We're going to look at how they model a single state, try to explain the huge inequalities between nations, and get into the fundamental debate about war and peace.
So, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off by asking a really basic question. How does a state actually work? Then, we'll look at the theory that all nations are basically climbing the same ladder of development, and then we'll hit the powerful counter-argument that says, nope, the whole system is rigged. From there, we dive into that timeless debate. Are we just doomed to conflict, or can we actually cooperate? And finally, we'll zoom out beyond the state to ask who really holds the power in our world today.
Okay, let's start at square one. What is a political system? I mean, how do you even begin to analyze something as messy and complicated as a government and its relationship with millions of people in a way that makes any sense? To really get a handle on this, political scientists, especially after the World Wars, wanted a more scientific, more systematic way to look at politics. They needed a model, right? A kind of blueprint to map out how all the different pieces connect and talk to each other.
And one of the most groundbreaking models came from a guy named David Easton. He basically pictured the state as a kind of processing machine. So on one side you have inputs coming from society, that's us, with our demands and our support. The political system, this machine, processes all that stuff and spits out outputs on the other side, laws, policies, actions. But the most important part, the real genius, is the feedback loop. That loop allows the system to see the consequences of its own actions and, hopefully, adapt so it doesn't break down.
Now, building on that idea is something called the structural functional approach. It asks a really simple but profound question. What does each part of the system actually do? The whole theory sees society as this single interconnected system, kind of like a body. So what's the specific function of the legislature, or the courts, or even a political party? The goal is to figure out how all these different structures work together to keep the whole system in balance and just running.
So once you've got a model for how a political system works, the next logical question is, well, how does it change? How does a state develop? And for a big chunk of the 20th century, the answer seemed pretty simple. Everyone's just climbing the same ladder.
Yeah, early thinkers, like Lucian Pye, really saw political development as this linear journey with a very clear destination. He argued that as any state develops, you should see it get better in three key areas. First, equality, which means more people participating. Second, capacity, which is just the government's ability to get stuff done. And third, differentiation, which is a fancy way of saying that government roles get more specialized.
And at its heart, this whole journey was seen as a straight line, a transition from traditional to modern. A traditional society, well, that was seen as agricultural, simple, where roles were all mixed together. A modern society, on the other hand, was defined by its complexity, super-specialized roles, individualism, and the universal rule of law. The assumption was that this was the path for everyone.
And Gabriel Aumann's model shows this perfectly. It's this clear, staged process. As a nation moves down the path, you see the modern, innovative parts of society grow, and the traditional ways of life just kind of shrink and fade away. The theory presented it as a one-way street, a universal journey that every single nation was supposed to take to become developed. But what if that one-way street is actually a dead end for some countries? What if a nation's ability to develop isn't just about what it does internally, but about where it sits in the entire global system? This is where a massive challenge to that whole modernization idea came from. And that question, right there, sparked a totally revolutionary way of thinking. Instead of looking inside a country to find the keys to its success or failure, these new theories started looking at the structure of the global economy itself.
This brings us to dependency theory. And wow, this idea completely flips the modernization script. It argues that the rich countries, the first world, didn't just get rich on their own. No, they got rich by actively making the third world poor. The theory says the whole global capitalist system isn't designed for everyone to succeed. It's designed for extraction.
And here's how it works. It's a cycle of extraction. You have raw materials and cheap labor flowing from the poor countries, the periphery, to the wealthy core countries. The core then uses all that to make expensive, high-value goods, which it then sells right back to the periphery for a massive profit. This creates a trap, a cycle of dependence, that one theorist famously called the development of underdevelopment. So it's not a ladder everyone can climb. It's a structural trap that's very hard to escape. Okay, so now that we have this idea of a global system, whether you see it as a ladder or a trap, let's zoom in on how states are supposed to act within it. And this brings us to the great foundational debate in the study of international relations.
First up, you've got realism. For realists, the world is a rough place. There's no world government, no global police to call when things go wrong. They call this condition anarchy. And in a system like that, every single state has to look out for number one. The only way to guarantee you'll survive is to get as powerful as you can. It's just a constant, never-ending struggle for power.
The classic image for realism is the billiards ball model. Just picture a pool table. Each state is a solid billiard ball. And what's going on inside each ball, its politics, its culture, it doesn't really matter to the other balls. All that matters is its power, its direction, and how it collides with others in this endless game of protecting its own interests.
But of course, not everyone was so pessimistic. Liberalism came along as a direct challenge to realism. Liberals basically said, okay, yeah, the world is anarchic, we get it, but that doesn't mean we're doomed to a constant fight. They believe that cooperation is totally possible, even likely, through things like international organizations, think the UN, deep economic ties, and the shared values that come when more countries become democracies.
And the contrast between these two is just so stark. For realists, the focus is always on conflict and power. The only actors that really matter are states. And the world is just anarchy. But for liberals, the focus is on cooperation. And yeah, states are important, but so are other institutions. And the system can actually become more like a society of states, with shared rules and norms.
Now, that classic debate between realists and liberals was incredibly powerful, but it was mostly centered on one key actor, the state. And the thing is, in today's world, that stage is a lot more crowded.
Liberals, especially, started to argue that the whole billiards ball model was just obsolete. The world, they said, looks much more like this, a cobweb model. And you can see it's a picture of complex interdependence, where governments, societies, and international organizations are all tangled up in this massive web of connections. A pull on one tiny strand over here can send vibrations across the entire web.
So the big takeaway here is that states are no longer the only game in town, not by a long shot. Power is now shared, and it's contested by a huge range of other actors. You've got multinational corporations that can shape entire economies, NGOs that influence policy on everything from human rights to climate change, and of course, terrorist groups that can project power across borders and challenge even the mightiest nations.
Whew. Okay, so we've journeyed from the tiny gears inside a single state all the way to the complex, tangled web of the entire global system. We've seen all these competing models for how to make sense of it. So what's the bottom line?
Well, the thing to remember is that these theories are more than just academic exercises. They're lenses. They're the lenses through which policymakers and all of us see the world. And the lens you choose fundamentally changes what you see. If you're wearing realist glasses, you're going to see threats and the need for a strong military. If you're wearing liberal glasses, you'll see opportunities to cooperate. And if you're using dependency theory, you'll see global injustice. Your lens determines your diagnosis and your prescription.
And really, that's the final question we have to ask ourselves. These theories were all born from the massive challenges of their own time: world wars, decolonization, the Cold War. But today, we face a totally new set of global challenges that just laugh at borders. Things like pandemics, climate change, the rise of AI. So, are the old lenses still sharp enough to bring these new realities into focus? Or is it time to invent entirely new ways of explaining our world?